Hello everybody, welcome to video 7. Coming up in this video, I'm going to introduce you to your new best friend, MeshFusion. As always, I like to start each video by saving our file down. You can find this file in the video 7 content folder and I'll version up. Yes. Alright, let's look at our enclosure parts, the front and back piece. We're going to duplicate these mesh layers, so I'll hit Ctrl D to duplicate them and I'll drag them out of the enclosure parts group locator. Let's close this and hide it. This is just a duplicate now that you can use if you need to go back. We aren't going to be returning to these item layers. I'll take both the back and front part and hit Ctrl G and we'll put them in their own group locator that we'll call Fusion Parts, because we're going to do things to these parts with MeshFusion. So let's start off with creating these little ribbing cuts that are in the front piece of our front part. So let's create a new mesh item layer. Let's see, let's just hide the buttons and we'll hide the front and back part. Let's go to a front view and I'm going to activate the sphere primitive. Make sure that you have a quad ball selected with a subdivision level of at least 3, and then we can just zoom in here. And I'll hold Control and just drag out a little sphere like so. I'm not too worried about it being directly perfect with the image. We can fix that later. Spacebar to drop the tool, pop into polygons mode and make a selection. Grab half of these polygons, Control X to cut, Control V to paste, and just move these over a little bit. Next, you can grab the edge loops between the two pieces and we'll go to the duplicate toolbox and bridge the two of them like so. Pop into a face mode for a second here. Let's grab the verts and let's just move them into place like so. I'll scale this whole thing up a little bit so it fits a little bit better with the reference image. And let's just move the rest of these verts. Let's move the rest of them on over to the other side. That looks good. And I'm just going to bring back the front part here so we can position this in the right place. Let's move these with snapping turned on so that we can just snap to something central here to make sure that we're right in the middle, like so. Spacebar to drop the tool. And let's go to a right view. I'll turn snapping off. And I'll move this into place here. I want this to be kind of a shallow cut, so I'm not going to center this on the front piece. I'm going to move it forward just a little bit like so. All right, let's go to a front view. And in the duplicate tab still, let's grab the clone tool. And I'll click once to activate this tool. And then drag down my clones. I only need 2 extra clones. And that looks fine. All right, let's not wait. Let's jump right into MeshFusion. So pop down here into the Fusion tab and you're going to see a lot of buttons that you haven't seen before, but don't worry, we'll go through them. Let's keep organized though. We'll name this front ribbing, I guess. That could be a good name. All right, in items mode, let's grab the front ribbing and Control click to select the front part and then click New Fusion and we'll call this Fusion Front and we'll leave absolute strip width turned on and we'll leave all of these at their defaults and then let's just click New Fusion with selected meshes. And what has happened here? Let's see, our 2 mesh item layers have turned green and now we have this new item here called Fusion Front. And if you zoom into that, you can see that it has connected those ribbing pieces to our front piece and there's actual geometry here. But that's not what we wanted it to do. We actually wanted to cut those polygons out. So let's go back to the front ribbing piece here and look over here. It says set or change mesh role. So we want to change the role of this mesh layer to a subtractive mesh. And you can see that it turns pink in the item layer and it's pink here as well. And let's go to the Fusion front piece. You can see that nothing's happened. It hasn't actually cut these pieces out. That's because when we use MeshFusion, we have to define the role of a mesh item layer, and we also have to define its relationship. So right now we've only defined its role. So in items mode, grab the front ribbing mesh item layer and the front part, and now we can define the relationship by hitting trim. Now when we come to look at the front Fusion piece, it's actually cut everything out. These changes or these cuts are actually live, so I can move these pieces around and they will become visible in the Fusion layer as well. So I'll select both of those, go into polygons mode, and I'll select these polygons. And you'll see that I can move this around and the cuts will update automatically on our front face. So you can make geometry changes or you can make transform changes, and your Fusion item will update each time, which is really powerful as a tool. I'll just select the Fusion piece here. I'll go to Fusion strips and say update strip items. And you'll notice that our Fusion item is now parented to all of these little locators. You don't need to worry about these. Just close this up. What you can do now is select, let me hide these pieces. You can select these strips individually and individually change their width. So right now this has a fillet that's 1/10 of a millimeter. Let's change this to a whole millimeter. And you can see that that one fillet has changed its dimension and all of the rest have remained the same. You can also select all strips and then adjust all the strips at once. So I'll change this to 1 millimeter and you can see that all of my strips have changed to 1 millimeter. And that's a great way to adjust all the fillets on your object at once. So I'll change this back. All right, now let's do the cuts for the front of the speaker mesh. So I'm going to hide the Fusion front piece again. Let's go to a front view and I'll hit N for a new mesh item layer, and let's call this mesh item layer speaker cuts. And I'll pop back into the basic toolbox and grab a cube primitive and I'll draw out a little rectangle like so. I don't need any segments, so I'll set this to 0. And I'll make the Y height something easy to work with. Let's do 2 millimeters. And let's give it some dimension. So I want to make sure that my shape goes through the front face of our front part here. That looks fine. Let's go to a front view. Spacebar to drop the tool. Now I want to do a little slotted shape. And an easy way to do that is to grab these edges here, hit B for bevel, make sure you have a round level of 2, and we'll bevel it half the height that we set here, which was 2 millimeters. So I'm going to set a value of 1 millimeter, hit apply, and you can see we have these perfect slotted cuts here, and these edges have automatically joined together. Let's go to a front view again, and let's just put these into place. Now I'm going to add our supporting geometry, so I'll grab these first and do a PolyBevel with an inset value like so, and then we'll add 2 loops here, Alt-C. That's fine. All right, go to a front view and copy and paste these polygons. Let's move them over to here, spacebar to drop the tool. And I'll grab these verts and move them into place like so. Spacebar to drop the tool. All right, grab all of the polygons, Control C, Control V. Let's move this up. I'm going to pay attention to the distance that I move this. Let's do 3.5 millimeters. spacebar to drop the tool, activate the scale tool, and make sure that you have negative scale turned on. And then we can just scale our X value to -100 to flip these around, spacebar to drop the tool. What happens when you do that though is it automatically flips the polygons. So you'll have to hit F to flip these back into place, and that looks fine. All right, let's use our clone tool in the duplicate tab again to clone these meshes up. So grab the clone and I'll turn on snapping, and I'm going to snap to this. I'm going to snap to this vertex and I'll drag it up, double the distance, so 7 millimeters. Whoops, 7 millimeters, there we go. And I'll give myself an extra set of copies there. Okay, that looks fine. Spacebar to drop the tool. And let's just select these extra polygons that we don't need and delete them. Again, making sure that we're cutting through all of the faces. The next thing I'm going to do actually is in the speaker cut, I'm just going to add in this little microphone hole. So grab a cylinder primitive, hold Control, and just drag out a little circle like so. That looks fine. I'll turn on snapping. I just want to make sure that it lines up with our LED through hole. Whoops. Spacebar to drop the tool. Let's just put this into place. I'm gonna make it a little bit longer and make sure that it goes through both the back and front walls of our front piece here. That looks fine. I'll grab these front and back polygons. Actually, let's just grab the front and back edges. That'll be a little bit easier. B for bevel, and then just bevel these in just a little bit like so. All right, smooth everything and pop back into the Fusion tab here. I will set this roll to a subtractive mesh. Everything turns pink, and we'll define the relationship, and we'll trim these. And now let's have a look at our Fusion piece. And we're going to have some problems. You can see that it hasn't cut everything out. Some of them have cut out, some of them haven't cut out. This guy's cut out. The reason some of these are cutting out and some of them aren't cutting out is because our base geometry isn't subdivided enough. There aren't enough polygons to work with, in other words. So let's subdivide that now. So I'm in polygons mode and I'm going to hit Shift D, and I'll set my subdivision method to Catmull Clark, and I'll just hit OK. Now if we go to our Fusion piece, oh, it's a little bit better. I think a few of them cut out, but we're still missing some. So let's go back to the front part, Shift D again, and subdivide this again. And now you can see all of our cuts are cut out just fine. And I will declare our front piece finished. All right, so now let's work on the back part. I'll turn the back part on. I'm going to hide the Fusion piece for the front piece. And let's make this battery hatch door. I'll turn off the reference images for now. They're just going to get in the way. I'll pop back into face mode, and I'm going to select these two polygons, hit L for loop, Control C, create a new mesh item layer, and paste those polygons in. Let's just temporarily hide everything else, and we'll call this layer battery hatch door. Pop into edges mode and select these edges, Shift G to select between, and these edges. And let's go to the duplicate toolbox, and we'll just bridge these. Make sure that you have auto connection turned on. There we go. I'll unhide my layers, and I'm going to delete this edge loop in the center here. We don't need it. All right, Shift X. Oh, sorry. Okay, now we're going to do a PolyBevel. I want this item to fit comfortably in the battery hatch door, and right now they are the same dimensions, so we need to make it a little bit smaller. So I'll hit B for bevel, and I'm going to do an inset of 0.3 millimeters, and I'll hit apply, spacebar to drop the tool, and then I'll delete this loop of polygons. And now I'll hit Shift X to activate the extrude tool, and let's extrude these polygons out just a little bit. I'll drop my selection because I just want these polygons. Shift G. I'll turn on snapping, and I'll move these so that they're flush with the back face of our back part. Spacebar to drop the tool. Okay, now I'm going to add a chamfer to this battery hatch door just for aesthetic purposes. I think it'll look pretty good. B for bevel, turn off snapping, and I'll just draw out a chamfer, so I need a round level of 0. That looks good. Spacebar to drop the tool, and let's grab this polygon and this polygon. Shift G, B for bevel. Let's add some supporting edges like so. You know the drill. I'll let you finish supporting this entire piece. All right, that looks pretty good. Now let's make a new mesh item layer. I'll go to a back view. I'm going to hide this front part piece. We're going to make the little feet for the bottom of this battery hatch door that are going to fit within the back piece of our radio. So pop back into the basic toolbar and grab the cube mesh item primitive tool here, and let's just draw out a little rectangle. And that rectangle will be 5 millimeters across. It'll be 1 millimeter thick, and we can eyeball the height of it here. Let's go to a left view and put it in place. So this is the chamfer that we created for our battery hatch door, and I want this to be positioned about there. It doesn't need to be so deep. Be like so, and you can see that it's popping out the back of the hatch door just a little bit. Let's go to front view, or sorry, let's go to back view. That's a good spot. I'll hit spacebar to drop the tool, and I'm going to round the edges of this as well. So I'll go into a perspective mode. I'm in edge mode. I'll hit B for bevel. Let's pump our round level back up to 2, and then you can just click and drag because all of the edges are selected since none of them are selected. So that looks fine. The next thing I'm going to do is mirror these over, so you can hit Shift V to activate the mirror tool. Just click inside the viewport here. It's already mirrored over the X. Let's spacebar to drop the tool, and from a back view I need to center these, so I will hit W, I'll turn on snapping, and then I'll just snap, whoops, I'll just snap to something central here. That looks fine. And we'll call this battery hatch feet. And we need to duplicate this layer. So I'll pop back into items mode and hit Control D to duplicate. And let's call this battery hatch feet cut. We'll need to make them a little bit bigger because this piece is going to cut into the back part of our radio. So go back into polygons mode and set your action center to local. Let's zoom in here so we can see what we're doing. Head over to the deform toolbox and activate the push tool, and then click in the viewport to activate the tool. I'm going to turn off snapping, and then let's just increase the size of this a little bit by 1/4 millimeter. Spacebar to drop the tool. That looks fine. All right, the next thing we're going to build, let's make a new mesh item layer. We're going to create a boss that's going to be attached to the back of our back piece here. And we'll have to create another piece that's going to cut a hole through the hatch door and also through that boss piece so it can fit a screw. So let's pop back into the basic toolbox. Let's go to a back view, activate the cylinder primitive tool, and hold Control and just drag out a cylinder. Make the rad 2 millimeters. And I have 16 sides here. That should be fine. And I'll turn on, I'll hit spacebar to drop the tool. Let's just center this with snapping turned on. Like so. Spacebar to drop the tool. Let's go to perspective mode. From a left view, turn off snapping. We just need to make sure that this goes through the wall, the inside wall of our back piece. Spacebar to drop the tool. Let's just quickly add draft. So I'll select this back polygon, go to System, Run Script, CAD Draft Maker, and let's set our draft to 3 degrees. Okay, that looks good. And let's grab these edges and put a little round on them, 0.25. Apply. That looks fine. All right, so let's call this mesh the boss. And I want to be able to snap to the center of this, so I'm going to make these quads. Plus, MeshFusion likes to work with quads, so it's a good idea to give it quads when you can. MeshFusion's gotten a lot better at working with n-gons and triangles, but it still prefers quad polygons. So with these selected, I'll go to Edge, Fill Quads, Fill with Grid Pattern, and hit OK. And you can see that I have a nice grid pattern on both sides here. All right, let's make a new mesh item layer. Go to a back view. Go to the basic toolbox, activate the cylinder primitive again, turn on snapping. And holding Control, just drag out another cylinder. Spacebar to drop the tool. Now I want this to be a specific size, which is 3.7 millimeters. This is the part that's going to fit the head of our pan head machine screw, those little screws that you see in most electronics. And it's going to be an M2 screw, so we need to give the head of the screw enough room. And this is going to cut out of the battery hatch door. So let's just grab this, go back into Snaps and Precision and go to Absolute Scaling. We'll grab the size and we'll make the X and Y 3.7 millimeters, 3.7 millimeters, and then just hit Explicit Scale. And let's go to a back view. Yeah, that's right in the middle. Excellent. So let's go to a right view and we'll position this so that it's sort of just part of the way through the hatch door. Now let's bevel this back polygon, and just bevel at any distance. We'll redimension it with absolute scale. So an M2 screw is called an M2 screw because the threaded shaft has a diameter of 2 millimeters. We'll give it a little bit of room. Make sure you grab the size first, and then we'll set this to 2.4 millimeters to give a little bit of threshold to it. 0.4 millimeters. Explicit scale. Spacebar to drop the tool, and just grab those polygons, hit B for bevel, and then we can drag these all the way back. Let's see, 5.5 millimeters is fine. Spacebar to drop the tool. I'll add a round to the back and front here. B for bevel. I'll just keep the same value that I had from the last time I used this tool and hit apply. And let's just add the supporting geometry needed for the rest of this. So I'll hit Alt-C. All right, that piece is done. Let's call this screw boss cut 01 because we'll need to duplicate it. We need 2 copies of this. We need 1 copy to cut through the hatch door and another copy to cut through the back. So let's duplicate this, Control D to duplicate, and we'll just call this one 2. All right, grab the battery hatch feet and the battery hatch door, and let's create a new fusion. Let's call this fusion hatch door and create a new fusion. Let's take a look at the feet connection here. And you can see that everything's connected just fine. All right, let's finish off this battery hatch door. I'll grab the screw boss cut 1. I'll set its roll to a subtractive mesh. And I'll define its relationship with the battery hatch door. So I've selected the 2 of them and I will trim. And you can see that we have the boss cut through the door. And that will be it for the battery hatch door. So let's turn that off for now. And let's work on the back piece, the back part of our radio. So the first thing I'm going to do is add that boss to the back. So I've selected the back part, I've selected the boss, and I'm going to say new fusion. And we'll call this fusion back. And that's connected quite nicely. Okay, next let's cut out the hatch feet from our back piece here. So I'll grab the battery hatch feet cut. I'll set their roll to a subtractive mesh. Let's grab the back part. I'll smooth it. So let's grab the battery hatch feet, the back part, and let's trim. And you can see that it's cut out our little recess perfectly there. We can look at this with the hatch door and you can see that those little feet fit in that recess quite nicely. And now all we have to do is cut this screw boss cut out of the back here. So this one's going to be a little bit trickier because if we set this as a subtractive mesh and then set its relationship to cut out of the back piece, it's only going to cut out of the back piece and it won't cut out of the boss piece as well. We're going to have to do something a little bit different. So let's define this roll as a subtractive mesh. It's going to have to be a subtractive mesh either way. And then pop over to the Schematic Fusion view and let's see what's going on here. We've got a bunch of nodes. If you haven't seen this window before, this is called the Schematic Viewport. We have our 3D viewport so we can see what's going on. And we have an item list over here. So what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at the Fusion front schematic for one, which isn't the schematic we need. So we need to go to the workspace and go to the third Fusion because that's the third one that we did. And let's see what we're looking at here. Let me explain briefly what's going on with these nodes. This can look a little complicated, but it's not too scary. We have our items that we've added together. You can see these primary parts are feeding into this primary input, and the subtractive meshes are feeding into just the input, and then those are feeding into this Fusion Union node, which is sewing everything together or taking it apart, and then feeding that into the Fusion mesh item layer, and then we have a result. So this screw boss cut, which is defined as a subtractive mesh, we need to undo these connections because we actually need this to be intercepting the process here. So we need it to finish what it's doing here, and then we're going to take the result and add another cut to it and then feed that into the Fusion. But before we do that, if you zoom in here, you can see that this circle is yellow. That suggests that it already has a relationship with other node items. So you can just double click that to reveal its other relationships, and it's essentially attached itself to every other intersect node in the scene. So let's just paint select these and delete these relationships, and then we'll just paint select these and hit backspace to remove them from the schematic. It doesn't delete the nodes, it just removes them. So now this is a free agent, but it needs its own Fusion intersect in order to sew everything together. So let's go up to Add, and you can add a Fusion intersect. If you don't see it, you can just type in Fusion intersect or start typing it and it'll appear. Double click that to add it to the schematic. And now let's hook everything back up again. So let's disconnect this from this. This is going to have to be an input value now. This becomes the new primary input, and then this output connects to the Fusion tree. Let me hide the Fusion hatch door, see our results, and you can see that our screw boss cut is now cutting through the back piece and the boss as well. Okay, and that's all we need to do. So let's pop back into the model view, and I'll make all of these visible. Just hide my Fusion parts here and take a look at everything. So everything's cut out perfectly. I'm happy with the results. All right, so as a last step, let's grab the Fusion item. We'll update all the strips because we made more cuts since we did that the first time. And then let's go to more Fusion controls and let's just select any non-airtight strips. And it's telling us that our Fusion mesh is airtight. Let's go to more Fusion controls and select non-airtight strips. And it tells us that our Fusion is already airtight. Great. So now let's just grab that Fusion item and then change this to an airtight final and press this double arrowed button and we'll go to convert to mesh item and we'll say replace Fusion item with mesh item. Yes. And it'll require a pause. And you can see now that we have this Fusion mesh item. The icon's changed to a little blue cube, which indicates it's a mesh item and no longer a Fusion item. And if you zoom in here, you can see that it's returned back to quads as opposed to this triangulated mesh. However, there are still some triangles around all of these cuts. Let's rename this front part final. And let's move it up top here. Now let's look at our Fusion hatch door. And we'll go to update strip items. It's got strips now. And let's go to more Fusion controls and select non-airtight strips. And it's telling us that it's airtight. That's great. We'll change it to an airtight final and we'll convert to mesh item. Yes. And let's rename this hatch door final and move that up. And then finally the Fusion back piece. So let's update all strip items. Let's go to more Fusion controls and select non-airtight strips. And it's telling us it's airtight. More good news. Change this to an airtight final and let's convert it to a mesh item. Okay. Let's call this back piece, back part, final, and move it up as well. So we've got all of our pieces cut out. That looks great. I'll turn the buttons back on. There's one change I wanted to make. It was bothering me from earlier. I want to make this antenna a little bit wider. If you look from a right view, you can see that it's much more narrow than my reference image. So I'll just grab this, pop back into polygons mode, hit R for scale, and I'm going to scale along the XZ plane. Just fatten this up a little bit. That looks pretty good. And then I'll just move these verts down back into place. There we go. That looks a lot better, and I think that does it for this video. So don't forget to save, and I will see you in the final video, video 8.